be. I don't really think it's that complicated. I think it's more that it's a little bit boring and detailed. And so people aren't necessarily as excited about it because it doesn't have the same sort of human story to it on the surface that a lot of other work does. But I think with a little bit of introduction, you can see the story behind the numbers and reconnect them to the human story of what's going on. So that's what I'm going to try to do today. Marissa mentioned that we've done prior financial trainings in this series, and she's going to resend that link. So today, we're not going to focus really on the details of how to read the financial statements and what they're called and how to read them, because there's a whole other recording on that. Today is really to help you get language and a story to communicate with your board and other senior leaders about the oversight function, what that means, what it means to exercise financial oversight. So I don't know who's all on this recording or going to be listening to this later, but for people that are financial staff that are in the day-to-day work of recording the transactions, that's not an oversight role. That's the role of doing it, right? Making sure that the numbers are entered appropriately and accurately and timely. The oversight function isn't to go back and repeat all that, right? There's techniques for being efficient in the oversight, for looking to see if things appear to be reasonable, appear to be in place, asking questions that are sort of the straightforward, obvious questions, and listening for the right answers that indicate that the financial systems are in place. Do you have your hand up?
Sorry, I forgot to mention that I'll be looking out for the chat if you want to drop questions in there. And then also, just as I did, raise your hand if you have questions throughout this presentation, and I'll be monitoring that. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. And we're a small group today, and we have plenty of time. So feel free, please, to be conversational and have whatever questions you want. We can take them as we go. So this is what we're going to discuss today. We're going to start out with the discussion about ethics as a framework, because we're mostly focusing on the board's role in financial oversight. And so the most important place for the board to be is really clear in their ethics. And we're going to talk what that means. That's sort of a big, vague, intimidating word until you unpack it and think about it. So we're going to unpack ethics for a little bit as the framework for board financial oversight. The financial statement review process, we're not going to get detailed into how to read financials, because we have that in a different webinar, but I'll talk about sort of the process and what should be expected and the high level supervision of the board at that in that role. And then what we're mostly going to focus on is what's called internal controls. Internal controls are a system within the organization to make sure that the numbers aren't just not just on the surface that they're appear correct, but that the transactions underneath the numbers are correct. So that's an example of, was it properly authorized? Like, we see the check got written, we see the money got spent, we see that you actually purchased what you said you purchased, but were you actually authorized to do that thing? Did you go through the right channels to do that? That's an example of what an internal controls question would be. So I'll give you a pretty good introduction to internal controls with the idea here that what the board should be thinking about is asking the right questions of the financial staff to understand that the right internal controls are in place. If you can trust that the internal controls are in place, and then you get financial statements from a system that has good internal controls, you can feel pretty good about the accuracy of those financial statements. So it's not just the financial statements, it's the financial statements from a system designed with these controls in place. And then the role of the CPA, there's many roles of the CPA, and we've talked about them in other presentations, but in this context, it's for the CPA to go back through and perform one of these critical internal controls, which is review. And also to look at the internal controls if you ask them to help you understand if the internal controls are properly designed. So let's get going on ethics. So every community has some idea of right and wrong, right? Every community has an understanding of what is appropriate behavior for an individual themselves in private and for an individual and what they do in their relationship with their community. Ethics is really the part that's about the individual's relationship to their community. So whatever their private morals, private standards are, that's a little bit aside. Ethics is about how they interact with the people around them and the expectations the people around them have of their behavior. When we get into business ethics or nonprofit ethics, sometimes the interesting questions are the difference between what an individual might feel is right or wrong for themselves, what they would choose personally, and what they're asked to choose because of their role in that organization. So it generally means in a nonprofit sense that you have to put the nonprofit first. If you're there in your role as a board member or a staff member, you have to put the well-being of that organization ahead of what you as an individual might think is right or wrong for yourself personally. That's the essence of ethics. It comes from the Greek word for way of living. So that's something all of you can translate into your own cultural language and your own examples and your own norms. Everybody has this sense of what we mean here. I'm using these words because these words are embedded in American legal framework and nonprofit law and governance, but they have parallels, equivalents in every other way that you could think about it. But there is a legal tie-in, right? So the American legal system is tied to this sense of ethics, and the word ethics we don't use so much in a legal sense, but we use the word duty. So the duty is the ethical obligation of a person, and that's actually a legal standard. So if you take on the role of a board member, that includes duties. You have duties as a board member, and if you fail to do those duties and bad things happen as a result of that, you are legally responsible for failing to do what you essentially promised to do. You could think of that a little bit like if you had a contract with someone and you broke the contract, they could sue you for breaking the contract. Because that really is what it is to be a board member. You've made a contract to provide a certain kind of service to the organization. What you get back from that is sort of the respect and honor of serving as a board member and the recognition of that. So it is an exchange and a type of contract. So this sense of ethics and duties isn't totally abstract philosophical. It also translates through to, in the worst case scenario, you really are obligated to do these things. I'll pause here. It looks like maybe there's a question. All right, I'll let you monitor the chat. I see there's something in the chat, but I'll just trust it's not a question for now. So these are the primary duties. Again, like you can translate this into your own language and culture, but this is the way it's normally expressed in mainstream nonprofit board training. Duty of care, duty of responsibility, and duty of loyalty. These are also, big, vague words. So now I'll kind of break it down into things that are more straightforward. So the duty of care, what does that mean? It's usually translated as a reasonable person. A reasonable person. That's your friend that you respect, your coworker that you respect. Sometimes they say a prudent person, prudent and reasonable, kind of the same thing. It's someone who is functioning sort of at a normal expected adult level. You don't have to be super smart, but probably not someone who everybody thinks really isn't very smart or isn't very diligent in what they do. It's a good person. Someone who does all the normal things you would expect of them. And in that role on a board, the first thing is ensuring legal compliance. So first, legal compliance, payroll has to be legal and tax returns have to be filed. And no one can be stealing from the organization. And you can't be taking money that's intended for a nonprofit public benefit purpose and have it benefiting just individuals, right? If it benefits individuals, it has to be because the individuals are a member of the class of people that was intended to be benefited. So if there's a donation that benefits an entire village and then individuals within that village are benefited, that's fine because it was to benefit the whole village and these people live within the village. But if it's just going direct to someone's family members or just going direct to people they know, that wouldn't be what's expected. Ensuring financial solvency, that's ability to continue operating. So the duty of care to the organization is the care that the organization can continue to do its mission. It can continue in existence. It can only continue in existence if it has the money that it's supposed to have. So the board has to be looking down the road a little bit. And ideally, the board shouldn't be caught up in whether or not the organization has money today or this week or even this month or even next month. Ideally, the board and the leadership should be seeing enough down the road that they're looking ahead at least 3 months, ideally 9 to 18 months down the road to see that the money is there to continue the programs into the future. Another critical role is hiring and supervising the executive director. The executive director is going to be frontline over the daily money management. So that, board members already know that it's their duty to hire and supervise the executive director. But what I'm saying here is that is essentially a financial function because the executive director is the front line on the financial. So not appropriate to hire an executive director who has no confidence in managing the financial aspect of that role. Not appropriate to fail to supervise the executive director with respect to the financial part of the operation. The executive director may say, I'm not a financial person, I don't want my job to mostly be that, that's fine, but they have to acknowledge that it's still a very important part of their job, that they work very closely with the financial staff and make sure that those financial documents are in good order at all times. So there's no such thing as an executive director who's off the hook for some pretty significant level of financial responsibility. And so the board has to know that and has to make sure that that's the case, that that's who's hired and that's how the executive director is held accountable. And then finally, ensuring that the organization is operating in accordance with its mission and strategic plan. So those words don't sound financial, right? I didn't put anything in there about money or dollars, but how do you know if an organization is operating in accordance with its mission and strategic plan? Well, if you look at the budget and you look at the financials and what they're actually doing is different from the mission and the strategic plan, there's your evidence that it's doing something different from what it said it was going to do. And that's really at the heart of most board financial oversight, is that simple and straightforward. It doesn't require advanced financial knowledge. It requires straightforward, what a normal, prudent, reasonable person would think or do. You know you have money to provide services to children that live in a certain village. And you're reading the financial statements and you're getting the financial report, and the organization has started providing elder care services in a different village. Okay, well, that's nice, that's good, that's important, but that's not what this money was for. That's not what our mission says, that's not what our strategic plan says. So one of these two things needs to change. Either we update our mission or we stop doing that work. That's board level decision, but it doesn't take a lot of financial savvy to just see that those two things are different and to ask the questions, how did these decisions get made? Why did they get made? Were they appropriate or not? And how do we make it so that the governing documents, the mission and the strategic plan match up to what's actually happening? Duty of loyalty. So putting the organization first, being faithful to the organization's mission. The organization never exists to benefit one person or one family. So the board can't act in any way that's inconsistent with the organization's goals. What's really at risk here, again, it's usually money, right? It could be other things, but it usually comes down to money. So that's part of the oversight here, is making sure that there's no inappropriate spending of money, either directly to the board member or indirectly to their friends and families. And then obeying applicable laws and regulations. Just like I said before, it's making sure that you're doing what you're supposed to do and reporting as you're supposed to be. And money is the indicator there. It's the, are you filing the tax returns? The board should absolutely put their eyeballs on those documents and see that they have been filed. You don't really have to understand them in great detail, but you do need to understand that they're prepared timely and they're filed timely. The final one is responsibility, and that's about not using the information for personal gain. So if you find out in the course of budgeting that the nonprofit is going to be renting a new building, and you know what the budget is for rent, and your friend or buddy or relative owns the kind of building that they're going to rent, and then you go tell that person what the maximum rental budget is so they can move the rent up to that budget maximum, right? That's a good example of conflict of interest there. You've used that information for private gain rather than putting the best interests of the organization forward first. So an example here for the board financial role is to make sure that they're not involved in contracting decisions, and that contracting decisions are made according to fair and objective protocols, and that goes to the internal controls we're going to talk about in a minute. I'm going to pause here just in case there's any questions about the board duties. What I was talking about is board duties to the organization. Any questions about that before we move on? Go ahead.
Good morning. Sorry, a little bit late, but I had a few questions. When you're talking about ethics, I know you're bringing up all the bad things that we could do. My problem is being Navajo, and I'm just the personality I got. Once I get to know people, I tend to start teasing and joking. Is that an ethical problem?
Not for me, but I've gotten in trouble for it too. I've absolutely gotten in trouble for it, and I have had to really think about my sense of humor, and how humor is interpreted. I hear you. When you feel comfortable with people and you're joking around, it feels right, it feels comfortable. But maybe if you're in a mixed group and you don't know the people so well, they have a different sense of humor. I think the fact that you asked the question is maybe the embodiment of an ethical person, just that you take the time to reflect about the difference between what is comfortable for you and how you are comfortable with people you're comfortable with, and what might be appropriate in your official role in the community. The thing about ethics is people kind of want there to be a right and a wrong, but we all know that life isn't that simple, right? So ethics is about having the right, first of all, ability to see yourself, right? Ability to step back and ask the question is the most important part. And then to think, to weigh out the difference between what feels good for you and what might be good for the group. Beyond that, there isn't really a right and wrong, but the wrong is to not ask, right? The wrong is to not consider. when you ask and consider and know that you're putting the group first, you know, maybe you make the wrong choice. Maybe someone does have their feelings hurt, but, you know, maybe you were weighing the difference between this moment feels awfully serious and people are getting really depressed and they're not using their optimistic brains to think about solutions. And I'm going to make a little joke and maybe lighten the mood up and maybe remind people to be positive in their outlook and be more solutions oriented. And so that's a good motivation, and that motivation is for the benefit of the group. But maybe someone says, oh, you know, he didn't take this seriously enough. He's just a joker. And you can't do anything about that. The essence of an ethical problem is when no matter what you do, there's got to be some negative, right? You don't really like either of the choices. There's going to be some harm to someone. And the ethics is about choosing the least harm. That's not all ethical problems, but that's when ethical problems get difficult, right? So, you know, if there's some chance that your joke is really going to hurt someone, then that's pretty straightforward. But if it's a small chance, that's probably not the problem. The last thing I'll say to your question, because it's a really important question, is that some of these things may just go down to the organization having agreements in place about not the humor, but just about like it often comes down to in a legal sense, it would be protected classes, right? So in a legal sense, you have to be careful not to do anything that's derogatory to anyone on the base of race, religion, gender orientation. Those are the sort of the hot wires. And that wouldn't just be ethics, that would also maybe be ideally in your organization's policy to give you extra guidance.
Okay,
I hope that was
thank you.
helpful. I love the question.
Yeah, I guess the other thing, I know I have a problem when I'm working and something doesn't go right. My background's been construction working, and so when things don't go right, I'll blurt out four little words every now and then because I want it to work right, but sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
How about something like that?
I think it's the same as humor, right? It's very cultural. Like, I'll tell you myself personally, the most uncomfortable I ever was in a job was with a boss who, when he got really, 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 really mad, he would say, gosh, darn it. And I was just never comfortable with him because I thought, like, who talks like that? But that's me, right? And I'm more comfortable. I have bosses that use 4-letter words, and I thought that was more normal. But that's me. That's not someone else, right? And so, again, I think you're asking the right question. The important thing is that you're aware that what you're doing may be offensive to other people, and you're thinking about it. I don't think anybody expects perfection from anybody else, or they shouldn't expect perfection from anyone. But I think we should expect self-awareness and concern for others. And if you know that someone you work with is offended by that language, you should try not to use it. And if you use it anyway, you should be able to apologize to them. That's just me, okay? I can't speak for your organization and what people have said to you. And that's if people say to you, you can't do this, period, right? It's not acceptable. We've asked you not to do it. We've asked you not to do it 3 times now. We're not going to ask you again. You're done. That's your answer. And that's maybe an example of you need to put yourself aside and conform to what you've been told for the organization. But if you haven't been told that bluntly, then you just have to feel your way and do your best.
Okay, I was thinking that maybe that's why they try to stick us in our own office where we can you don't have to hear all that. And then the other one I got is politics. Now that we got an election going on here in Navajo, I've been kind of requested for a visit from an actual candidate. And I just, I wasn't sure how to respond to that, and I haven't responded to that.
I love your questions. These are all really great ethical questions. These are the kinds of things people need to think about. What does your nonprofit do?
Nonprofit things. Working with ranchers, farmers, the culture of
Okay.
our people, economic development, water.
Okay. All right. Okay. So everything, all of those things are things that are absolutely affected by what politicians do, right? There's absolutely every politician, anything they do affects the things you're concerned with. So I don't want to go too deep into this topic because it's legal and it has some subtleties. Marisa, I'd be happy to do a different presentation or work with you to get the right person to do a presentation on how much legal interaction a nonprofit can have. A lot of times people think the answer is zero. Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, I just want to add one more to that.
Yeah.
The difference of also maybe kind of throw in the difference of working on Navajo Nation reservation and like off the reservation also.
Yeah. The answer would be the same politically either way for nonprofit law, okay? You're allowed to be actively involved in understanding the political context of your work on the reservation and off the reservation. Your work is absolutely affected by Navajo elected officials as well as officials in the state of Arizona or New Mexico or Utah, wherever you are, and US level. They affect what you do. You're absolutely allowed to be involved in that. You're not allowed to well, there's a very specific financial formula for how much money you can spend advocating for a specific candidate or a specific issue. But if you're advocating for a certain kind of policy, right? We want the budget to include more money for irrigation district repairs. We need more repairs on our aging water systems. That's not a specific candidate, and that's not even a specific bill. And you can advocate for that all you want in your nonprofit role if that's aligned to your nonprofit mission. Someone else is going to advocate for more money for after school programs for kids. That's their mission. You don't get into a political problem until you endorse a candidate, take a specific position on a specific bill, and potentially if the candidates are more or less equal on your issue, but you're endorsing one over the other, that's where you'd start getting into trouble. And certainly if you were, without paying attention to the issues, paying attention to promoting one candidate over the other, and they were making promises to you or you were giving donations to them, those would be things that would be sort of across the line and of concern. But lots of nonprofits, for example, they have candidate forums and they get all the candidates to answer the questions that are the most important to that nonprofit. So you mentioned farming and ranching, water, economic development. You could put together 5 or 6 questions that relate to that agenda for you and ask each of the candidates to answer those questions. A couple of the candidates won't even answer the questions. People can make their own conclusions about that, right?
Okay,
So
thank you.
this is, I'm going to kind of turn from here into the stakeholders because this relates to some of the questions you're asking, right? So from an organizational perspective, what are your duties to the stakeholders? Well, first of all, who are your stakeholders? Funders. So what do funders expect? What do they give you money for? Some funders may give you money and say, you can't spend one dime on anything other than after school care and nutrition and literacy for children. That's it. So if you're now spending some of that money on political advocacy around that, your funder told you not to do it. So it's unethical if you do it with their money, right? But someone else may give you different money to do it. Program beneficiaries. You say you're offering an after-school program for kids. You better be qualified to do that. You better actually have people that are appropriate to be running an after-school program for kids. stick them in the wrong program, you're not benefiting them. You're not doing your duty to the stakeholders of providing the right kind of program to benefit the people you say you're benefiting. Individual donors are the same as funders. They have, they may give you small dollars, but they have an expectation that you're doing what you say you do. The public at large, same thing. They may not be giving you money, so they're a little bit lower level stakeholder, but they have an expectation that you're doing what you say you do. You say you're a credible nonprofit, you're spending the money in the right way. That better be a truthful statement. Your staff are also stakeholders, right? So you can't have a nonprofit that's doing great things out in the world and treating their staff terribly. I mean, you can, but that will all come back to you, right? And that's certainly unethical behavior. You have a duty to the staff to treat them properly, make sure they're well cared for and safe at all times. And the safety, I think, is the key role for the board to think about. Are staff safe? And then the board is also a stakeholder. And so, but their primary role is in oversight. So the duties to the stakeholders, number one is truthfulness. Truthfulness from people like me and people that might look in on any nonprofit from the outside with a legal and financial perspective. Truthfulness, they're going to say, show me the money. Show me how you spent your money. I read your report where you said you did all these great things. I'm not really going to believe you until I see how the money got spent. If the money got spent in the same way that you're saying, then I'll believe you. So again, that's where why we're having this whole ethics discussion about financial oversight. They're one and the same. Is it true that the money says the same thing as what you're saying about what you're doing? And then care and design and delivery of programs. That's not so much a money thing, but that's a basic competency thing. You say you're going to take care of children, and you better know how to do that, right? And then, of course, acting in accordance with community standards and the law. So I'm going to wrap up on ethics in a minute, but and then we're going to move to some of the putting it in action, right? So the board will often state what the values of the organization are, and that'll often be embedded in the mission of the organization, what the community values are. A nonprofit organization, a Native-led nonprofit organization for sure is probably going to have something about cultural values embedded in their mission, right? We're not just going to provide childcare, we're going to provide culturally appropriate childcare in accordance with our traditional values that's embedded in the mission. Ethics is the policy that operationalizes that. So the ethics of that would get down to, are you making sure that the childcare providers actually speak the native language? Are you making sure that the childcare providers are actually culturally competent so that they can provide that culturally competent service? So the ethics policy would have something in it where it would get into the duty of care is to be honest, to be diligent. Diligent means you follow up, is your program actually culturally competent? Not just say it is, but actually make sure it is. Are you accurate when you're providing information to farmers and ranchers? Is that accurate information, or were you just making it up, right? And confidentiality. If people give you confidential information about their operation, are you keeping it confidential? We talked, and this is just examples, we've talked about these things, but these are examples you would put in place in a written policy for your organization to spell it out to everybody what is expected of them. Because if it's just at the high level, mission level, it's not in enough detail for people to know. So maybe, Gary, that relates back to some of your questions about can I joke around? Can I swear? Maybe your organization has a policy that's a little bit broad and it says, we trust you to be a professional and be respectful. And maybe your organization has a policy that's really narrow and it says you cannot use these words, right? And that's up to the organization to decide how they want to communicate that. Part of your ethics policy would be about the duty of care, again, for fundraising. And there's usually specific things in your policy that has to do with fundraising in and of itself. And what has to happen to ensure that the funds are used the way they're intended. And that goes straight to financial, right? You say you're going to use the funds as intended. That's a verbal statement, right? That doesn't sound financial. How do you do that? That's where the financial processes begin. How you ensure that if you take the money and you say you're going to do with this, do a certain thing with it, you have the financial systems in place to back that up. So it starts with policies that support this. And we're going to get to that in a minute. Like, what are those accounting policies? Last thing I want to say on this ethics as a frame is that money is the indicator, right? Ethics is the framework. We set out to have programs that are, support our traditional culture, do the right thing by people, get this kind of good done in the world. There's these ethical challenges out there. What's going to cause people to cross that line and stop doing good for their community and start just benefiting themselves or taking shortcuts? It's usually lack of money, right? And so when we follow the money closely, it allows us to follow the ethics closely. And one of the key things is being aware, like, where are there shortages of money? Where's there real financial pressure? That's where you need to also look for people making the wrong choice because they're under that financial pressure. Cutting corners on program delivery because you want to shave off a little money on this program to put it into that program. That's a good example of a true ethical problem, because you're in this organization, you have one program that's kind of overfunded, easy to fund. You have another program that's underfunded, hard to fund. You know your community, you know who's benefited by this underfunded program. You know who doesn't really need more money in this overfunded program. You think the right thing to do is to take the money from the overfunded program and put it in the underfunded program. And you think that's going to help the most people in your community. So your personal moral choice is to do that thing that helps the most people, right? But in the nonprofit context, your duty is to use that money appropriately. That's the duty to the nonprofit, and that's the nonprofit's duty to the funders. And that has to come before that desire to do the most good. And that's exactly where good people, honest people that are really trying to do the right thing, get themselves and their nonprofit organizations in real trouble. It's trying to do the right thing. It's not trying to do the wrong thing and take the money home. That's not really the issue. I mean, that's an issue when people do it. But what is more of an issue that I see is when people are just trying to do more good with their money and they decide that their obligation to the funders is less important than their obligation to the community. And I say that with total respect to that perception. Like, I think most of us as individuals in that moment would perceive the obligation to the community as higher than the obligation to the funders. That's where you have to really stop and think and listen in your role as a nonprofit board member, or in your role receiving salary as a nonprofit staff person. Your duty is to use that money as the funders intended and not to make that personal choice. And so that's where you have to be able to separate what's right for you from what's right for the organization. And again, it comes back to, if the accounting procedures are pretty much locked in and everybody agrees they have to follow them, then you're not really going to be able to make this choice, cut the corners on one kind of program to benefit another. So obviously, the best way to prevent programs is to have the right funding and not promise more than you have funds to do. I'm sure everyone here has been in this situation, right? Really common for people to cut corners on management to get more programming. We don't really need to have the bookkeeper come in 3 days a week. We're going to cut them down to 2 days a week. That allows us to deliver more services to the people we're trying to serve. It seems like the right decision at the time because you're serving people and you're not serving yourself. You're doing it for the benefit of others. But it harms the organization in the long run. And in the long run, it may prevent the organization from being able to continue in the long run to exist to do its job at all. So final things on this section about board responsibility is to remember ultimately board members in this sort of type of contract with the organization to serve as board members. They certainly have criminal liability if they act to steal from the organization or to benefit themselves. That could be criminal. Liability and tort, that's a legal phrase, but what that means is if you harm someone, but it's not a police matter, you can be sued by that individual, just a private lawsuit between two individuals. They hold the board member responsible. The example there would maybe be if staff were routinely put in unsafe situations and the board knew that the staff were routinely in unsafe working conditions. The board does nothing about it. A staff member gets hurt. That person's family could sue the board members for failing to do their duty. And that would be a tort liability. That's a personal lawsuit for a harm. And then the last one would be a contractual obligation. And that's a funder, for example, could sue you for misspending their money. They gave you the money for a drug rehabilitation program. You spent it on after school reading. They sue you because you misspent the money. So important thing to think about here in this context of financial oversight is directors and officers insurance. So that's a type of insurance that will protect directors and officers if they get sued and they lose, but they weren't criminal, then this type of insurance would cover them. So a common one would be you're a board member, someone somewhere in the staff is sexually harassing someone else, the person who's being sexually harassed sues, and they win, and it comes back to the directors and officers that you didn't do enough to create an environment where that didn't happen. So now you're responsible. But you don't have to pay out of pocket because you have this insurance, and the insurance will pay at that time. So it is really important as part of board financial oversight to make sure that you have directors and officers insurance and that it's appropriate for the organization and the board members. So I'll stop here again for questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, I had one on your previous slide. You were saying about a director or staff kind of attacking another one. We kind of had a little incident at one time where it's kind of opposite way, where we had kind of like an outsider attacking one of our people here. I guess how to I don't know what I'm trying to ask, but how do we recognize that?
It's a big topic, but what I hear from that is that your first obligation is to protect your staff. So if anyone is behaving towards your staff in a manner that's inappropriate and they are unsafe physically or mentally, they're being attacked, then the organization has to protect the staff. So if you're, the first thing would be like telling them, like, get yourself out of that situation. No, it is not your job to engage with this person who's harmful. And making sure they understand that they're not expected to continue in a harmful relationship. It would be good practice for the organization to have a clear statement of, and this kind of goes back to your earlier questions, Gary, about joking and using swear words, right? What people may know and trust you and feel fine when you do that, but then there's this outsider who's using swear words and they say they're joking, and when you call them on their harsh attitude, they say, oh, I was just joking, but everybody knows they weren't joking, right? And plus they're an outsider and you're not, and the trust just isn't there, right? And so the joke doesn't go across. But if you want the organization to have a policy that can be applied sort of objectively and uniformly, that's where it becomes difficult, right? Because you want to have a policy that says, you know, you swear at any of our staff, you're done. We don't provide services to you. You don't work for us. You're done. We protect our staff. But then you come through the office one day and you're swearing, and everybody, no, nobody cares. Nobody thinks you're mean, and you mean it, right? But you had to have the same policy to protect staff in both cases. That's where things get a little difficult.
Yeah, another one is over the
that-
phone. Another one that happened is like over the phone.
But it's the same thing, right? If you're on a phone call with someone and they're being abusive, right? The staff need to understand that they have no obligation at all to stay on the phone longer than to say, I'm hanging up now, right? You can't talk to me that way, I'm hanging up. Whatever, you know, appropriate phrase, they're not supposed to curse back, but they end the call. And they need to hear from their supervisor, and their supervisor may need to hear from the board. Like, yes, that is okay. That's what's expected. We do not expect you to stay on the phone and take that abuse. That is not your job.
Okay, thank you.
And the flip, like what you're trying to understand is like, it could come back, you could get in trouble for failing to protect your staff more than for failing to provide services to this person who's abusive. But if you really had to show which way it was, you're going to be better off if you have written policies that say clearly, we will stop giving you our services if you act in the following ways. But same would be true for your staff. We're going to fire a staff person who acts this way towards clients, right? Or a board person who acts this way towards staff.
Okay, so probably the inappropriate way to handle something like that is, like if I went out there and punched the guy out, that's the wrong way to handle that. Which I almost did.
Well, there you go. So that's again, right, the difference between what you would do as a person yourself, right, and what you have to do in your formal role as a representative of your organization, right? And you have to always be able to see the difference. If this is purely personal, if I was just hanging out at home and this person came and insulted my family, I'd deck them on the spot, no questions asked, right? But that's not what's happening. You're in your formal role as a board member or staff person, you're a representative of the organization, you are obligated to behave in a certain way. And that may be different from what you would do on your personal time. That's the essence of what it's about. All right, this slide is about the financial package that the board should receive each quarter. This is digital, okay? The board either gets this financial package or it doesn't. If the board gets this package quarterly, there's a pretty high level of confidence that the organization at least has the capacity to appear to be presenting these financial statements quarterly, and they're useful, and you can assume they're maybe accurate. We'll get into maybe they're not accurate, but at least they're there, right? So if they're not there, if you're asking, hey, you know, it feels like I've been to board meetings for 6 months and I've never seen any financial report, and they say, oh yeah, we'll get those to you, and then they don't, that's a big problem. And I recently worked with an organization and I was shocked because everyone on the board was very high level, wealthy people, high functioning. They ran their own businesses. Unfortunately, no one on that board knew anything about nonprofits. And the executive director also was a very high functioning person in terms of bringing in a lot of money. And she had a great vision for what the organization was going to do, but she was clueless about finances. And it was a few years that she never gave the board financial statements. And because these board members all were saying like, oh, well, I guess nonprofits are just different. I mean, in my business, of course, I need to see financial statements monthly, but I guess at a nonprofit, you don't have to see financial statements. And so they just never asked for financial statements. And the truth was their financial situation, they had money, but they had no control over it. It was coming in and going out. They were scrambling. They just didn't have a controlled, organized system. And the board was not asking the right questions. They should have known that if they're not getting regular reports, it's because there's a problem. And you have to, first duty of board members is to make sure that the system exists that can produce these financial statements at least quarterly to the board. Best practice would be to schedule board meetings to take place about 6 weeks after the end of each quarter. 6 to 8 weeks max, after, right in that zone, 6 to 8 weeks after the end of the quarter. 6 weeks is about, let me say this. It'd be a really good accounting team that always had their financial reports ready to go 1 month after the end of the quarter. That's like fast, everything's perfect. 5 weeks, totally fine, normal. 6 weeks, that's sort of like, yeah, that's fine, but shouldn't go over 6 weeks. 8 weeks would be 2 months after the end of the quarter. That's late, right? Not horribly late, but it's late. So if the board sets the expectation that they need in that 6 to 8 weeks zone after the close of the quarter, and every time they meet, they see a financial package that has these things, then it's clear with staff, you must have these reports ready to go for the board by these reasonable deadlines. And the board just knows right then and there, and this has nothing to do with whether or not you can read a balance sheet or read an income statement. You can tell if it's in front of you or not, right? You can tell if that board package came to you on time with those reports. Whether or not they make sense is a different question. Make sense what I'm saying? It sounds so basic, but people skip it, right? So then you get into the question of, what is reasonable? How do you read these for content? I just think basic level, just like you can tell they're there or they're not there, do they make sense? What's your expectation? The board members should have a basic sense of if the organization is running, at $100,000, at $500,000, at $1 million. Round numbers, basically how big is the organization? If they don't understand that, they should sit with someone on the board or on staff until they do have a basic sense of scope, right? And then look at those financial statements and see, does this basically conform to what I was thinking? Like, I was told we had about 100,000 in the bank. I'm looking at this financial statement. It says we have $10,000. That's a pretty big difference. Help me understand how we got from 100,000 to 10,000. What happened to that 90,000? And then what's the story? You were under the impression that the nonprofit Help Farmers and Ranchers, they told you that the 90,000 went into an after-school program for children. They're trying to tell you that the children are going to grow up to be farmers and ranchers. You're not really buying it, right? That doesn't require a lot of sophistication to read the financial statements. It's just reading them and asking simple, straightforward questions. Part of it is that board members should get basic training from other board members to understand how financial statements have looked in the past, what the expectations are, and maybe get some training from financial staff to get enough confidence to have a basic read and a basic understanding, not be intimidated by the terms. Again, Marisa has a different presentation that kind of would be a board financial training on what the terms are and some basics on how to read the statements.
I have a quick question here, Poppy.
Yeah.
Just before you go into the next topic is, what are some of the financial policies a board member will want to ensure that a nonprofit has in place?
That's what I'm getting to.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. So this is sort of, how deep do you dig, right? So you're a board member, you're reading financial statements. You want to be a good board member, you've taken this training, you're really enthusiastic. Do you say, it's not good enough to just read this financial statement. I want to see the detail of all the transactions. I want to see every check that got written. No, that is overstepping. That's inappropriate for the board. The board should back up and ask if there are policies and procedures in place that are designed to ensure the financial accuracy, right? So it's not for the board to go and start reviewing every check. Was that check accurate? Did it go post to the right place? Was it properly signed? That's an auditor's job. That's a CPA's job. That's maybe the executive director's job. The board job is to ask, show me the written policies and procedures that you're following to create your accounting system, and show me how these are designed to ensure accuracy and integrity. The policies and procedures should create a comprehensive system of internal controls, and the board's focus should be on ensuring that these internal controls exist and that they're up to date and in use. Beyond the board's scope to get into designing the procedures, your question is, do they exist? Show me. I want to see them, right? I want to read them, but I don't want to get into whether or not they're accurate. That's someone else's job. Board policies, what Marissa was just asking about, they're going to provide high-level policy guidance, and then there's detailed policies below. The board isn't involved in the review of the operational policy and procedure beyond just making sure that it's there. So a board policy is going to govern something like, you can bank at Wells Fargo, right? This person can sign checks. The organization can go ahead and have a line of credit or a credit card. Those are high-level board policies. The operational policy is going to be who looks at that bank statement every month to make sure it's right, who reviews that, where does that get filed, right? Who has access to the credit cards, where do they get filed? Not for the board to review the details of the operational policy beyond making sure that they're written and that they have these internal controls embedded. And I'm going to walk you through what the internal controls are. So again, like just a high level read once a year, the board could say, would be reasonable, show me your accounting policies and procedures manual. I'm only going to look at it enough to see that when I just randomly open it and I read a random procedure, it's written in enough detail that a person who could read and had some familiarity with accounting could follow this step by step. And I'm going to ask you if these procedures include standard internal controls. But I'm not going to go in as a board member and start editing individual procedures. I'm just going to see that the whole thing is in place. Yes.
Yeah, when it kind of back on the financial part of it, when they're presented at the board meeting, the financial records that's presented at the board meeting, should they kind of be attached to the agenda for record keeping purposes?
Yeah, it's probably a good idea. Standing agenda item would be to review the financial statement. I mean, if you're meeting 4 times a year, then 4 times a year, you would review those financial statements. If you're meeting more often, then let's say maybe you meet 6 times a year, you still only need to look at the financials 4 times a year.
I guess what I'm saying is that the actual document should be printed out and be attached with the agenda. No.
Yeah, I mean, however you do your board agenda. So yes, whatever materials go with the board agenda should, if it's printed out, they should be printed out and attached. If it's electronic, the electronic files should be attached. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because how else do the board members know these things exist? Right?
Yeah.
How else did the board members know they looked at them?
My question is just that, you know, you can save the hard document, but a soft document, an electronic copy, I guess, does that version stay?
That's fine. That's totally fine. Lots of organizations are totally electronic now. So, I mean, that kind of goes to a different issue of like how the organization is keeping archives of their electronic records, which is a different topic. But yes, it's totally fine to do it electronically or hard copy, whatever your board prefers.
Okay.
So I did this like different formatting because this is like a subtopic within this presentation, right? So I'm talking about high level board responsibility for the financial well-being of the organization, right? Have this ethical framework, be involved, look at the quarterly financial package, but once a year ask, and always ask, is what is the system of internal controls behind these financial statements? So I just want to walk you through what internal controls are, because that's where the board should be focused. It's a system designed to safeguard assets, ensure that the financial statements are reliable, right? Not just made up numbers. It promotes operational efficiency, which means more dollars for your actual program, and to make sure that what people are doing is what management wants them to be doing. They're not just off doing their own thing. There's 5 components to internal control. The environment at large, which is what we've been talking about. Ethics leads. The board leads with their ethics, right? You create an overall culture and an environment of ethical organization. Risk assessment. Within that, you focus in where's the risk, what's most likely to go wrong, what protections do we have in place? And then information and communication, right? Is the information readily available? Is it kept in a way that's useful? And is it communicated? Is the information just sitting on one person's desk and you have to go get it? Or does the person who has the information do a good job of putting it out there, giving it to people, making sure people are informed? Really common that organizations have all these stuff, but they're not communicating it. And so maybe the board never asks and the accountant never offers. And so the board never sees the financial statements, even though they exist. And then the last thing is the actual activities, the control activities, which we'll talk about some more. So I'm not going to keep going through this because part of why I put these on slides is so you can take this and you can use this presentation to educate your board, right? This is what you're asking the board to pay attention to. Ask the question, does this exist in your organization? Does your organization demonstrate your financial integrity in your daily operations? Do you have this focus on integrity and this commitment and diligence to your financial statements and financial systems throughout your organization? Starts with the board. Starts with the board asking the right questions. This part, the risk assessment, this is not for the board to do. This is for other people to do. I'm just letting you know what it is and that the board should ask, right? When you design the internal controls, did you do a risk assessment? The accountant says, I don't know what that is. I don't know how to do that. Great, we're gonna hire you a CPA who's gonna help you do this. But the board wants you to know that we want this to be done, right? Not for the board to make it up, not for the staff to make it up, but it's an investment that you make in the internal controls. This is also, you can hire an outsider to help you think through what these information systems need to be that ensure that you have an effective system in place. Not for the board to get into the details of performance evaluations for staff, but it is for the board to say, I need you to tell me that there is a performance evaluation system in place and that every staff member is getting a performance evaluation, because that's part of our overall system of having a good control environment. Communication, same thing, not for the board to get down in the details of how communication is happening, but definitely for the board to ask the ED, how are things going? How are people communicating? Are you sending regular financial reports, not just to the board, but to other staff people so they can be involved in the process? Those are all fair questions for the board to ask of the ED and of senior staff. Not to tell them how to do it, to ask them if they are doing it, right? To ask that they do it, not to tell them how to do it. And then within the accounting policies and procedures, 2 basic things for the board to be focused on. Preventive controls are designed to prevent the bad things from happening in the first place. So the key thing there is authorization, right? Starts with the board. board level policy, who can be a check signer, board level policy, who's in charge of hiring and firing, right? That's preventive. The right authorization, the right documentation, access to documents, right? Who's got the car keys, who has keys to the safe, who has the passwords to the bank accounts. And then separation of duties is another formal preventive control. One person has the access, the other person has the authority and makes the transaction. The only way they could steal is if the two of them got together. It could still happen, but it's less likely that the two people are going to both do the same bad thing, right? It's more likely that it'll only happen if the one person's acting on their own. So those are all preventive controls. And again, it's not the board's role to make these up and put them in place. It's the board's role to say, are there preventive controls in place? Give me an example of how preventive controls are in place. If you can't answer that question, we should hire an outside consultant to help make sure that these controls are in place. The other kind of controls are detective, and those are to find out after the fact if anything bad happened. Reconciliation, I'll talk about that some more, but that's a formal accounting process that happens to prove that there's an outside source and what your inside source is, and if they match up. Review is the key board role. This is what you're doing. You're reviewing. You're not doing it directly. You're reviewing that it got done and how it looks and if it makes sense. And then separation of duties. Again, the board serves a key function of separation of duties. You don't have any hands-on frontline responsibility. You shouldn't be check signing unless it's an emergency. You're certainly not involved in day-to-day bookkeeping. You're not involved in preparing the financial statements. You're just the reviewer, and that's a separation of duties. The board just reviews, the accounting staff just prepares. That's separation of duties, and it helps with these detective controls. You come in behind and you see if things appear to have happened or not happened. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess how much control would the nonprofit organization have over a contractor, subcontractor, especially when the organization is doing the actual payouts to the subcontractor?
That's that should be in the terms of the contract with the subcontractor. And that's kind of a big question you asked, so I can't get into too much detail, but it is a big and important question. The short answer to that big and important question is you should have a contract that answers those questions. So any subcontract needs an actual written contract, and that contract would spell out how much control you do or don't have. So that speaks to authorization. So one of the key preventive controls is making sure that everything is properly authorized. So the budget is the primary tool for authorization, and the board has the primary control over the budget. Once you've authorized the budget that says there's a $100,000 line item for contractors, that's the amount that can be spent on contractors. Now it's up to the ED and the staff to spend that $100,000 appropriately. But if they spend $200,000, you know they're out of line, right? Because they were only authorized to spend $100,000. Sometimes there's a secondary authorization required. And within your question of authorization down at not at the board level, but at the staff level, are they authorized to sign a contract? What kinds of contracts are they authorized to sign? Are they signing contracts that specify degree of control, or are they signing contracts that are essentially blank, right? That's an internal control at the contract level. I'm giving you like this really high level overview, but actually like down in the details, these things become very detailed and very lengthy. What are your detailed procedures for contracting? In a large organization, that's a whole book just on contracting. Documentation, right? Every single financial transaction needs some sort of documentation. That's a concept, right? The procedure is the detail. what documentation, who signs it, where is it filed. But that documentation needs to be somehow, physically or electronically, an auditor, an outside person needs to be able to go back, find any individual transaction, find that documentation, ask the question, was it properly authorized? Was it accurately entered? Was it processed according to the written policies and procedures? Not the board's role to audit down to that level, but the board's role to ensure that there's a system in place where this is the expectation and the norm. Access is pretty straightforward, but it has to do with physical access as well. So in addition to something like if your organization has a lot of cash, you probably want to have a safe or a lockbox. Who has the key? Who has the password? Your physical building, is it safe? Is it protected? Are the doors and windows appropriate for where it's located so people won't break in and steal all your equipment and computers? Keys to the vehicles. You don't want a drunk kid breaking in, getting drunk, taking the car, causing a car accident, right? Did you take reasonable precautions to make sure that it was basically hard for someone to break into your organization and steal your car? We talked a little bit about separation of duties. That's a key concept. It's hard in small organizations, but that's very much, especially in a small organization, where the board's role is so important, because probably all your staff is doing all the work. You're the only people who can be the separate reviewers. And that's why it's so important in a small organization for the board to have an independent review of the financial statements and of the financial policies and ask these questions. Because the people that are doing the daily work, they're in it. They're stuck in the daily, they're not looking up, and they can't review themselves. Reconciliation is an accounting process. Board doesn't need to know how to do it. Board needs to know it's happening, right? Every single month, somebody needs to reconcile the bank account. That's a formal bookkeeping procedure. You don't have to do it, but you need to know that it is happening. It's the single most important control procedure out there. Ideally, the executive director should be putting their physical initial on a bank reconciliation every month to say that they saw that it got done. So it's appropriate for the board to say to the executive director, are you signing bank reconciliations every month? Are you looking at them every month? Right? And you want an honest answer from the ED. And if they say they're not doing it, then you know you have a real problem with internal controls across the board, because that's the most basic internal control there is. So if they're not doing that, you got to question if they're doing anything. Another simple example of reconciliation is you have a list of all the assets, and once a year you go physically walk around and see if the same assets that you're seeing match the list. That's not for the board to do, right? That's for the staff to do. But it's fair for the board to ask, did you do this? Did you physically reconcile the assets to the asset list at least once a year? And then review. Again, this is the key board function. In addition to the board function, the accounting staff should be reviewing each other if you have multiple accounting staff. The ED is the constant internal review. If you're so small that the ED is the bookkeeper as well as the ED, then there's no possibility for the ED to review themselves. So again, even more important at that point, the board's role is critical in review. Board quarterly, and remember the budget as part of that. We're reviewing to make sure that not just that the financial statements exist, but that they're following the budget. And then the final piece of outside review is the outside CPA. At least annually, an outside CPA should be looking at the organization's financial statements. You want them to prepare a tax return and financial statements and be that final backstop of outside review. So I want to talk a little bit about the certified accountant's role as that final backstop, but before I do, I just want to pause here again for more questions on internal controls. I hope I was good in my point. I'm not asking you to be the person who creates the internal controls. That's too much for the board. But every board member should be able to ask those basic questions about if the system exists, and they should feel like when they get answers back, the person who's answering can use that term internal controls and can speak to it with some confidence. And if that's not happening, then it's appropriate for the board to say, we need to take some of our budget money and use it to hire a certified public accountant to work with the internal accountant or the ED to make sure we have these procedures in place. So I just want to leave you with basic understanding of who that CPA is. They're going to be licensed by a state. They have a 4-year degree. They've passed a difficult exam, and they're licensed by the state, and they're obligated with that license to follow very formal rules on how accounting is done. And by definition, they know how to understand internal controls and design an internal control system. One of the functions is for outsiders to be able to read the financial statements and to have them be uniform. But one of the other functions is to perform an audit. You don't necessarily need an audit, but you might need an audit. If you get an audit, they're definitely going to look at your internal controls. If you don't need an audit, you can hire them just to make a separate evaluation of your internal controls or just to set up internal controls. So if you're a large organization, you need an audit, then all this stuff needs to be in place. But if you're a small organization and you're just growing and you're not going to need an audit for a few years, still a really good idea to invest in a CPA to help you design these systems before you need them. Get everybody trained, create that environment before you need the audit. Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, how does an auditor, I guess, verify internal control?
Yep, what they'll do is they'll look at your accounting procedures manual. If you don't have one, you're done, right? There are no internal controls as far as they're concerned because there's no manual. And then they'd work with you to create the manual. Assuming there's a manual, they would pick a procedure in that manual. So one of the procedures is going to say every check over $10,000 has to have 2 signatures on it. Okay. Now that's an internal control. So then they're going to test, like I see it's written. What I don't know is if they're following it. So then they're going to go into the accounting system and pull out all the transactions for more than $10,000. Let's say there's 5 of them. Then they're going to just randomly say this one. They'll pick the middle one. Go pull that check. Go pull the documentation for that check. And they pull the check. They pull the documentation. Look on the check. Are there 2 signatures? Yes or no? Right. Look at the rest of the backup. Was, what was the process, whatever the process was for writing that check? They can see from the documentation if that process was followed. Were the 2 signatures from the 2 authorized check signers, right? Maybe there's 2 signatures, but they're the wrong 2 signatures, and so on. So they'll randomly check, they'll randomly identify some critical internal controls, and then they'll check all the way down to the documentation to see if those internal controls were followed. That's called testing. That's literally the testing part of an audit, is when they test the internal controls. If they test the internal controls and it's good, mostly like everything they test, it's all done by the book, then they're going to have a high level of confidence in the financial statements, and they'll do less testing of the actual financial statement balances, and your audit will be cheaper. If they test the internal controls and it's a mess, like they may have put it in the accounting manual, but they didn't train anybody and nobody's doing what they're supposed to be doing, then they're going to have low confidence in your numbers, and they're going to go back and they're going to do extra work to independently verify the important numbers on your financial statements, and that audit is going to cost you a lot more money. So that's another reason you want strong internal controls, is it lessens your audit cost. And it's another reason why small growing organizations don't start out with an audit. That's too much, right? You don't need it your first year and it's too big a hill to climb. But don't say, oh, we don't need an audit, so we don't need a CPA. We don't need an audit for another few years, so we're not going to worry about this. That's the wrong answer. Say, we've got 2 or 3 years to grow slowly. We've got 2 or 3 years to bring this whole system online. And every year we're going to take another bite and build a little bit more of the system. And within 3 years, we'll have all these pretty robust, complicated procedures in place, and everybody will be trained. And then we'll be ready to hire the CPA and have the audit. And if you do it that way, it won't come as a shock to the system.
I guess if there's an audit going, should the CPA be a part of the audit also?
So the CPA, so let me clarify. I'm talking about the kind of audit that is a CPA audit. There's also such a thing as a tax audit, and that comes from the IRS, and that's a whole different animal. And yes, you would want your CPA to help you for sure. If the IRS was auditing you, you would absolutely want your CPA to be defending you in that audit. Don't you go, right? That's bad. Send your CPA to go talk to the auditors on your behalf. But what I'm talking about is you hiring the CPA directly to do an audit.
Okay, yeah, just recently we had, we didn't know how to consider it, if it was an audit or not, from Navajo Nation. And
so that would be similar to an IRS audit. That absolutely, the tribe itself could audit you, absolutely. But that's not a financial audit. That's a government entity auditing you. So for sure, it could be the tribe. It could be the tribe as part of the tribe's audit, right? That could happen because the tribes themselves get audits. And sometimes as part of their audit, they'll audit a nonprofit that they're giving a fair amount of money to. That is all, the word audit is correct. That is definitely a type of audit. But all I was talking about in this presentation was you hiring your own CPA to audit you, just you, and even before that, to get them to set you up so that you're ready for an audit is the first step.
okay, thank you.
We have
I mean, and
another,
unfortunately, what happens to a lot of, go ahead.
no, I was just saying we have another question here when you get a chance.
Yeah, go ahead with your question.
Okay, this is
Bonnie?
Bonnie. Yeah, I have 2 questions. What should one look for in seeking a CPA to conduct an auditor? Are there special requirements to look for? Because I don't think every CPA, or does every CPA, can do an audit.
They'll let you know. I mean, first of all, the CPA designation means you are licensed, you have the knowledge and the skill and the expertise to design internal controls and to do audits. That's what that means. Everything else is kind of secondary, okay? And lots of CPAs use it in that other context, right? So lots of CPAs only do tax. But the designation CPA isn't actually a tax designation. It's actually a designation that means you can do auditing. Auditing and tax, like Gary had kind of mentioned, like they kind of come back round, right? When the tax guy comes to audit you for tax purposes, you better have a tax preparer that understands what they're doing, right? And that understands your system and how to defend you in that audit. But your question, Bonnie, is when you hire a CPA to do this internal controls, you don't want to hire a tax CPA.
Okay.
You want to hire an auditor. And they will always be very clear if they're an audit type firm or a tax type firm. The larger firms do both, but it's pretty rare for one person in that firm to do both. And the first conversation, it should come out pretty quickly what you're hiring them for and which side of the shop, or if they're just the wrong place for you.
I see. Okay.
I do want to give you one little bit more that is embedded in your question. you can hire a CPA or a CPA firm to design a system of internal controls for you. But once you've done that, and once they've designed that system for you, you can't hire that same firm to do your audit because they'd be auditing themselves,
I
right?
see.
Because they're like, I created this internal control system. Obviously, it's fabulous. So then if they audit it, they're going to be like, well, we don't want to find anything wrong with the system we created,
Right.
right? So they have to have a different firm come and audit you at that point.
Okay. So my second question is it, let's say your building burned and you didn't have all your financial documents in a fire safe file cabinet, and you're required to do an audit. Is there such a thing as, and I don't even know if modified is the right word, is there such a way to get somewhat of an audit that's acceptable?
Maybe, maybe not. So there's formal, so within the generally accepted auditing standards, so that's one of the things you have to memorize and pass the test to be a CPA, generally accepted auditing standards. There's a whole chunk of that on when you have to say this organization is unauditable, can't be audited. And that's your professional opinion. And you sign a letter saying, in our professional opinion, this organization is unauditable, period. They still have to pay us because we still did the work to determine that it's unauditable. And at that point, it's the end. And that's, one of the ways organizations get in real trouble is they've left it so many years that they can't get that audit. And it may be 2 or 3 years building the underlying system so there's enough in place that the CPA firm can even do the audit. And that's why I say start early. Start building those systems early so when it's time for the audit, you just breeze on through.
So at
Second
some
part of your question, Bonnie,
Okay,
there is a second part to your question, which is that there are techniques for reconstructing an accounting system. And they're a little bit different for tax purposes than for financial audit purposes. So for income tax purposes, the IRS there's a way that they will allow you to reconstruct your records. And for financial audit purposes, it's sort of less stricter, but there are methods, but it probably wouldn't pass audit muster, but it might be sort of good enough to get you back on your feet again until you can get the systems back in place. That's called forensic accounting, just like in crime, right? Forensic rediscovering, and it's expensive. It can be done, but it's quite specialized and quite expensive.
So the objective is, if you lost all your documents for whatever reason, is to eventually get that unauditable, what did you call it? Unauditable audit period, and get it signed and then start moving forward and reconstructing it. So the sooner the better you do that, the better off you'll be in the.
Let me answer you a little bit differently, actually. It really depends on so there's 2 core financial statements, right? There's a balance sheet and an income statement. The balance sheet is the organization at a point in time. The income statement is the transactions for the year. Recreating a balance sheet is not that difficult, because one of the core things you do in an audit is you externally verify each number on the balance sheet to some external source, right? So cash, that's easy. How much cash is in the bank? Bank statement, financial statement, boom, you're done. Furniture and equipment, go look at it, right? Estimated value, put it on your financial statement, boom, you're done. Loans you owe other people, go ask the other people what's owed, find the record that they have, you can verify that, and so on for each item of the balance sheet.
Okay.
You can recreate that. What you might not be able to recreate is what happened during the year.
I see.
Right? So worst case scenario, truthfully, is if you can validate that balance sheet, but you can't validate the income statement, you can't have an audit for that year because the audit has to be for the 2 statements together. You'd skip that year, but your balance sheet's good. So at the end of that year, you could have an audit because you would have a good income statement for that year.
I see.
So you don't have to necessarily go back to the beginning of time. Really, the worst case scenario is you only lose 1 year.
Oh, okay. I do have one more question if no one else has a question. Can I go ahead?
Yes,
So
please.
a lot of organizations are using the cloud now to store their information. Is that a board, would it be a board responsibility to develop a policy of how that cloud will be used and accessed?
I would say that they shouldn't develop the policy. They should ensure that there is a policy, right?
Okay.
They should say to the ED, I want to see that you have a policy, and I'm going to read it. And if I think it's lousy, I'm going to tell you, go try again. But the board member shouldn't be editing it or rewriting it. If the ED can't do what the board is asking, then that's a reflection of the ED's competence, right? And the board should question if that person should be the ED, or if they should hire an outside consultant to help them. That's fair. But does that make sense, that answer? The board should absolutely ensure that that policy is in place. And that's part of the accounting internal controls. That falls under documentation.
Documentation under internal controls.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now,
Are the documents secure?
okay. Are cloud-based abilities safe? I know a lot of organizations use them, but I don't know.
Yeah, they're safe if they're safe, right? They're safe if they're designed with the right internal controls in place. And I wouldn't begin to know how to do that. I would absolutely have to hire someone. I have no idea how to make a cloud-based system safe. But there's people, that's all they do. All day long, every day for different clients, all they do is design a process for them, train them on the process, offer backup support when they have questions.
Okay.
And that would be a standard part of a modern accounting system, is that it wouldn't just speak to physical document retention. It would always also speak to electronic document retention.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I think we're actually at our time up. I don't know if Poppy, in terms of your time, you needed to.
I'm happy to stay for a few more minutes.
Okay.
I'm so
All
happy
right.
this was such a good conversation.
I think Gary has one more question.
I thought nobody would come and nobody would have any questions, and I'd just be talking at a blank screen, but you guys have made this great.
All right, Gary, did you have a question?
Yeah. Well, I guess my question is there, I guess it's qualifying as being a board member. When I started here, I was asked by the president of the board at the time to join as a board member. So I said, okay, yeah, I'll help support what you guys are doing. And my intention was never to be a board president, or even where I'm at as an interim executive director. My goal was to create a profit-making business, but now I'm here. And I guess my question is related to being qualified to be a board member. How does that fit together?
You ask such good questions. See, this is what gets you in trouble. If you weren't asking the good questions, people wouldn't invite you to be on the board and make you the interim ED. Sorry, that was me joking back. I think what makes you qualified is asking the good questions. Like you've been identified as qualified because you're asking these good questions. It isn't necessarily special background. It's a person with a good reputation in the community who's known to be an ethical person, who's known to ask good questions and be awake and paying attention, right? I think any person who's motivated and paying attention can be trained to be a good board member. I really believe that. ED may be a little harder. I mean, you could basically train anyone to be an ED, but you really got to ask if anybody wants to be trained to be an ED. ED is a tough job. It's a really tough job. It's a really hard job. And you really do need to devote a lot of time and energy to being an ED. And so I think, you know, lots of organizations reach a moment where they have no choice but to ask a board member to step in as the interim ED, because that's what has to happen. But you want to get yourself out from under that as quickly as possible. Money, of course, is the constraint there, right? There are contract executive directors, but it's, you know, you need money again to do that. I think if you find yourself in this position of being the interim ED, you need to, I would first go straight to the budget, figure out how much money is there and what's realistic to spend on either getting a qualified ED in place or in getting you, the interim ED, sufficient support that you can come up to speed fast enough to do the things you need to do. If none of that's in place, there's not enough money to support you. You don't have the qualifications. You're being honest with yourself when you admit that you don't have the qualifications. You don't have the time. You admit you don't have the time. Nobody else is stepping forward. At that point, you really have to ask if the organization should continue. And that does go back to basic ethics. Is it ethical to continue if you know that continuing means doing everything wrong, misspending the money, not taking care of your employees, not delivering good programs, but yay, you continued, right? Or is the right thing to do to say, we're going to find an organization that's similar to this one, we're going to give them what we've got left in the bank, and we're going to close up shop and call it a day. There wasn't enough community to support to keep this thing going. And I guess the middle path in between there is you basically put a hold on everything, you stop all activities, and you focus all your energy on essentially restarting the organization by raising enough money to bring on board a new executive director at a reasonable salary, or to hire the right consultants to support the interim executive director in making sure that they've got the basic governance in place. There's no easy answer.
Hello, this is
Right,
Stan. I have a question.
Please.
Is there a questionnaire that a list of questions that we could ask a board member that's out there that we can follow to make sure that we have a good board member? They take this questionnaire and they read it and they check off stuff that's in the questionnaire. So would that give us a better idea if we're getting a good board member?
Yeah, it's a good question. There are lots and lots and lots of resources out there to support nonprofits in developing and training their board and identifying good board members. I didn't research like to find you a specific checklist, but I know that there's probably 10 at least high quality sites devoted to the kinds of questions you asked, and they have lots of checklists and articles on board recruitment and board education for your benefit. Marisa, maybe I have a feeling you already know a lot of these, and you could maybe answer this question better than I could with your favorite sites.
Yeah, we actually can send that out as a follow-up too. I think in our last recording, we did send out resources for folks to use, and we can add that to the checklist to send out to folks besides this video and your PowerPoint.
I would say though that like you can find those checklists off of these very good sites that are designed to help nonprofits. But best practice would be to customize it for your organization and your community and add the questions that really reflect your community and cultural values. And you're better off with a person that is the right person for your community, even though they really don't know that much about nonprofit board management, because they can learn that, but they can't learn the cultural community stuff. But then you have to commit to training them, right? Commit to, if you have the right person who shows up with the right heart and the right mind, you can give them the right information. If you have the wrong person with the right information, it doesn't matter, because they're not coming from the right place, and you can't change that.
All right, well, thank you very much, Poppy, for that good information. And we'll be sending out a follow-up email to everyone with this recorded session, and then any handouts and just some of the questions that you had in terms of resources, we can include that in there as well. But thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Thank you to Poppy.
Thank you, everyone. I really, really enjoyed being part of this. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, Ms. Davis.